for years and years, for decades really, the public has complained that high school graduates in Maryland would have no available job to go to when they graduated, that they were only prepared to work at McDonald's, and unless they were going to a four-year college, there was a dead end. There's also been a complaint for decades that high school students were bored in the last years of high school, that they were wasting time. And so as a result, when Maryland passed their landmark education legislation several years ago called Blueprint for Maryland's Future, one of the points of that legislation was to redesign high school. So under this redesign, students would have a much clearer pathway to the future. So we're going to hear today a little bit about those pathways and what's working, what's not, what's expected of businesses and of K-12 education. So I would like to start with you about talking about sort of how the legislation is playing out and what it means, what students will be able to do potentially, if it works, in 2030.
Yep, so thank you for that. I'm Richard Kincaid. I work with the Maryland State Department of Education. And part of the work that me and my team is responsible for is making sure that students across the state of Maryland have access to high quality programs of study where they can learn about various careers beginning as early as elementary school. And then once they get into high school, they have a number of choices for training, skills training, knowledge training, so that they can then think about a little bit more intentionally what happens after they graduate. So across our state, we have 47 different programs in career and technical education. And what Blueprint has essentially done for these CTE programs, things, when I was in school, we called them vocational programs. Now that's morphed into the traditional trades, health science, engineering, and everything in between. What Blueprint has done is provided an opportunity for us to more meaningfully connect these programs with industry-recognized credentials, things like a certified nursing assistant, Cisco or CompTIA certifications in networking or cybersecurity, lab technician certifications in biotech and biomedicine, and take these credentials either directly into a workplace or receive credit at post-secondary 2-year or 4-year institutions based on the prior learning. That piece of the system has really always been around for the last couple of decades. What Blueprint is going to accelerate across our state are the connections of these students in these pathways into registered apprenticeship programs. And so within Blueprint, within the third pillar, there are 5. The third pillar is around all things college and career readiness. Maryland has told us that by the year 2030, 45% of every high school graduate in the state of Maryland must earn either a recognized credential or license and or complete the high school level of a registered apprenticeship program, which is a dramatic change in the type of work-based learning experience that we are now providing to students across these programs. A little bit of ninja math, that means by 2030, we need approximately 30,000 registered apprenticeships to become available for high school youth across the state. It's a huge lift for education, and it's an even bigger lift for our employers across the state. So I appreciate the opportunity to share these pieces out today, and hopefully in the next 15 or 20 minutes provide you with some options for how you can help us support the system to make sure that youth are moving into high-wage, valuable careers within our state.
Thanks. Your Defender One obviously needs employees. So could you talk a little bit about the challenges that you faced getting a workforce, employees, where you find them, what roadblocks there are, and what could help.
Absolutely. My team, who happens to be sitting in the front row, will tell you that staffing is definitely, one of our bigger concerns at the end of the day. I think to Richard's point, getting students through internships and apprenticeship programs is really important. For me, as somebody who leads a labor-based business, we need to be able to connect with those high schoolers early on, right? We need to create relationships with either schools or government organizations, or even, student government body groups to help facilitate that relationship. And then after you do that apprenticeship, it's how can you get them to either stay with you or end up at a place like Towson University where they can pursue a formal higher education and then maybe even come back to you in the long run. One of the biggest challenges that I think we face is barriers to connection. It's how do we communicate with groups of people who want to work but have, barriers, whether it be technological, socioeconomic, and can't get to us. My main mediums are things like Glassdoor, ZipRecruiter, Indeed, but there are large numbers of individuals who want to work that can't use those methods. It just doesn't exist for them. And so, we partner with Central Scholarship, places like the Urban League, and the Butterworth Community Foundation to provide these grant programs, and they have access to those groups, and they can go into schools, and they can facilitate that connection with people who want to work, need to work, and people that we want to work for us. But how do we still take that a step further, right? They come to us and we can pay them an absolute living wage and let them provide for their families and make their community safer, but how can they then pursue further formal education while also providing an opportunity for the rest of their family and their community? And that's where we tend to struggle. We want people to feel like they can succeed over time, not just succeed immediately. And so partnering with those institutions is great, and providing those grant funding is awesome, and partnering with people like Richard is fantastic, but we need to provide a pathway to them to pursue formal education so that they can become leaders in their own community and they can facilitate the same kinds of relationships over time.
As president of Towson University, you're that next step. So can you talk about what happens to a student potentially who is in high school? Does Towson have any role there? And then what can they do to, in terms of a four-year degree?
Yeah, great questions. First, great to be with everybody today, and thank you for the invitation to be here. There's a continuum of education, and Richard was talking a little bit about career and technical education, which is so important. For many students, though, the academic experience doesn't begin when they enter Towson or the University of Maryland or Coppin or Morgan or any of the wonderful institutions of higher education here in our state. It begins really early. In fact, I would argue it begins in kindergarten or before. But for students who are on a pathway to an academic higher education institution, the interface with high school is tremendously important. We know that kids that aren't doing well in algebra are probably not going to do well in higher mathematics and are probably not going to either attend a four-year college or do not well in a four-year college. We know that reading skills and literacy are really important. So giving kids the foundational skills and then offering collegiate courses at the high school level through dual enrollment, advanced placement, and the like. A couple of words, though, about Towson, which might be interesting to people. Towson University today is a university of about 20,000 students, the second largest public university, comprehensive research university right here in the Baltimore region. About 20,000 students, but about half of our students transfer to us from the community college. So there's this sequence that students go through from high school, many of our students, to the community college, to Community College of Baltimore County, to the community college here in Baltimore City, to other community colleges around the state, and then come to us really well prepared for academic excellence at the four-year level. About half of our students start at the first level. I want to say one more thing, though, because I think it's important and reflects back to something you were saying, Richard, is that giving students applied professional skills, giving them opportunities for professional experience while in school, having internships and professional experience is tremendously important, as is giving them credit for those kinds of things. So I believe strongly that we need to give provide our students with opportunities for credit for competencies that they have and knowledges that they've gained, and they may have gained those competencies and knowledges not in the classroom, but out of the classroom. And having things like stackable credentials so that students can gain opportunities to have pathways to success at an academic institution that may be atraditional, but just as important and really profound.
This all sounds great, but we wonder whether it'll work. I know that right now only about 60% of students in Maryland are actually meeting the standards in high school that they need to go on to pursue a technical or a career pathway right now that's paid for by the state or the county they go to school in. That means 40% still aren't meeting that standard. I wonder, do you think we can get there by 2030, Richard? And also, what happens if we don't do that?
You know, I think it's an excellent question, and it's certainly one that, you know, my colleagues and I ask often, like, is this the right path? Was this the right piece of legislation? Was this the right time? And I think what happens is when you begin thinking about a transformative system and designing what it means to get us to a different place educationally, those conversations start very aspirationally. And then as you begin implementing, that's when it takes the political will to do things that are hard. And usually that is money, right? And so the pain point is often, can we afford to continue doing this? And I think the question that's really being asked in a lot of circles right now is, can we afford not to? When we think about 40% of our students right now roughly not being on track to be college and career ready by the time they graduate, that's alarming. But it also means that there are a lot of opportunities for us to begin to right-size those numbers. Governor Moore and others across the state have invested heavily in early childhood education programs. This is where it starts, building the foundations of literacy and math in pre-K, elementary school, then put students on a path to then be college and career ready, you know, at the right time. And what Blueprint does is it creates a framework to do all of those very specific things to make sure students moving forward are on track. Like anything hard, it takes time to move the system forward. And I think, you know, it's probably going to be a lot of questioning whether this is the right path until we recognize the benefits of being on this particular path. I want to close that comment with, it also requires us to rethink how we have conversations about education within our households across a number of spectrums. In my household, I have 2 high school students, a sophomore and a senior, and so I get to see the work that we do operationalized through my own kids. Like, how is this happening? You know, is it working correctly? Did they hear it correctly? Were they guided, you know, in the right ways? And one of the easiest conversations that we can have right now is removing this dichotomy of college or career. When people say, are you going into a career or are you going to college, we have historically spoken about these things like they are equal destinations, and they're not. We all end up working. That's the destination. It's a career, it's a job, it's gainful employment. The pathways that we choose to get there include college and apprenticeships and internships. And probably, like me, for many of us in this room, it's not a linear approach. It zigzags all over the place. I work in education. My degree's in business. My wife, her degree is in education. She works in business, right? It's weird how this all sort of, you know, works out. But that's the path that our kids are on. And making sure that they know what paths they can choose and at what times is important for them. And that's exactly what this work does.
Jared, I wondered if you could talk about this sort of reality of having a 16-year-old working for you in an internship. Do you think businesses are really up for that?
that's an even more complicated question than we gave Richard. So in certain industries, you're going to have age limitations. Period. So for us, our limitation is 18. That's when they can get a security guard certification card. But I want to challenge Richard a little bit. I don't know whether it has to be career versus college. Why can't it be career and then college and then career?
Yep.
Right? Why can't we create a system where instead of saying, okay, I'm going to go directly into a trade, we create a system where maybe they go into that trade and then like we were talking before in the green room, is if somebody gets a welder's apprenticeship and then they become a welder, why can't they then go to an institution of higher education and then maybe get a business degree so they can start their own welding business?
Yes.
And how can we create pathways like that instead of, and look, I speak for a lot of business owners when I say that historically, we've said, it's the Department of Education's problem to figure out how we can get these people through the system, but, I sit here on the stage today and I would seriously argue that businesses in our community really need to take a step forward and say, okay, how can we actually help change this program? It benefits us in the long run to have employees who want to work, right? Have a good work ethic and have a good educational background. And when we provide opportunities, we create this extremely long-term generational idea that people can take control of their own destinies and take care of their families. That's where institutions like Towson come in, and where we can go back to individuals like Richard and say, okay, this doesn't have to be that linear approach, right? This is going to be, around the world, through the rainbow, all that stuff, and we're going to make sure that if you get a credential, that's great, but you don't have to stop there. You get your formal education, and then you come back even better, smarter, more educated, stronger, and then maybe even open up doors for more opportunities for yourself and your families.
Yeah. But I'll let you have a point I think you want to make, and then we'll go to questions after you.
Sure, yeah, a couple of quick things. First of all, it's often been said that if your goals aren't scary, they're not big enough. And one of the things that I'm really pleased about being a resident of the state of Maryland is actually the ambitious nature of the blueprint. Now with that controversy, not cheap, but really an essential element, I think, for the future economic vitality of Maryland. And I think the blueprint can't be looked at as individual pieces. They have to be looked at as a systemic whole. There are 5 piers to the blueprint, each of which are important in their own right, but the power of the blueprint is the interaction, in my mind, between them. So I really hope that there's an opportunity at some point for folks in this room and other places to try to dive deep into what the impact of that blueprint will be, because it's going to be great. Secondly, I wanted to say that the skill set that we try to train people on, there are operational skills, there are functional skills, but then there's something that educators have been calling 21st century skills, which are important for everybody to have regardless of discipline or field, regardless if they're a welder or if they're a mathematician, or I'm a clinical psychologist, or whether you're a psychologist. Things like critical thinking, things like communication, things like creativity, things like beginning and being able to solve problems. They're essential skills that are important for everybody, irrespective of where they've been. And the final point I want to make is, I think one of the obligations we have as educators, one of the obligations I have as the leader of Towson, is to say that we want to take people from point A, wherever that point A is, and whatever that point A is for an individual, and be able to get them to the point B that they dream about. We want to get them to the point B that they dream about, whether that's developing skills to become a welder, whether that's skills to become an educator, whether that's skills to become a business person, as your wife did, or whether that's skills to become the president of a university. We want to get you from point A to point B. That's our goal, that's our mission, and that's why I think we'll be successful. And that's why universities, whether they be community colleges or whether they be four-year institutions, that's why they're engines of opportunity.
Thank you. We'll go to questions now.
Thank you. We have quite a few here, actually.
Great.
I'll start with this question. How does a small business become accredited to host apprentices? Do business owners need a certain level of education or experience?
The answer is no. In Maryland, it's actually a little bit easier to become connected with apprenticeships than maybe in other states. So our Maryland Department of Labor, we have a unified agreement with the federal government. And so Maryland Labor is able to work with employers to register apprenticeship programs within their businesses. Small businesses, large businesses, process is the same. You can go to Maryland Labor's website, and it's clearly marked, I want to host an apprentice, and it begins with an online form. And the group is really responsive, so I would encourage everyone in here, please check it out. We need everybody to help out on this front.
What is, if there is any, outreach to or collaboration with immigrant communities or nonprofits around the area in enrolling in colleges and trade schools, and then employing and upskilling them? If none so far, is there desire to include these diverse communities in these efforts?
Do you want to ask that? Yes.
Yeah, I'll take that just very briefly. Indeed, we are always reaching out to and have really a multitude of partnerships with nonprofit organizations, not just in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, but throughout the region. They're an important engine for universities to be able to reach to the community. I have a very strong belief that one of the responsibilities of a university is to be engaged fully and completely in their community and to be engaged with the residents of their community. And so whether it's working with immigrant populations, whether it's working with any particular population, and we in Maryland have many different segments, many different population elements, one of the routes to doing that is through nonprofits. By the way, one of the programs that I'm most proud of are programs that have been funded by several different foundations and individual philanthropists to bring high school students from a variety of backgrounds, oftentimes fairly marginalized and difficult backgrounds, to our campus to be able to be better prepared to enter a university when they finish their pre-university years. By the way, what you said earlier, I wanted to reinforce just one more point, and that is that this begins early. It doesn't begin when someone comes to a university or community college, and we need to fully reinforce and understand the importance of early childhood education. That's where it all begins.
If I may real quick, I think that businesses really have to take a step forward, right? And we have to acknowledge that part of helping our own communities and making sure that we're being advocates for ourselves and for those groups that were mentioned. The question is, we need to reach out to these organizations that specialize in helping those groups, specifically financially with grant funding and helping those groups get into educational institutions and apprenticeships and industry credentialing. It would be impossible for those groups to reach out independently to every business and ask them if they want to participate. Businesses need to step up and go to those organizations, contact them, and make relationships that really do help these groups.
Yeah.
This one is for the panel. How do local trade schools and vocational training programs in Baltimore compare to college in terms of trajectory for career growth?
So I would say, I would almost hesitate of comparing them because they have different purposes. They serve different outcomes a lot of times. And I think for students, it really is being intentional about what it is you need and a career that you are passionate about. For students that are in the K-12 system, we can do that through wraparound services on a school campus. For folks that have aged out of the school system, through the American Job Centers, through a number of partners across the state, including career centers that offer technical training or even career offices at four-year institutions. The conversation at the front end is really important to make sure that the student is well-versed in what it is they're looking for, and then to make sure that these career and technical standalone providers are able to meet that student's needs. Yeah, I don't know that I would compare them, directly. I don't think they're apples to apples.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they're really two different segments of the educational spectrum. Each are important in its own right. Sure. And I think the important thing is whether it's a trade or technical school or whether it's a university, that there be a commitment to the success of each and every student, and that there be a commitment to providing a high-quality education, irrespective of content or domain.
Well, look, this is something you don't get very often. It's a unanimous decision up here. I mean, I agree with my other panelists. I think that, comparing two fundamentally different levels of education or pathways is an impossible task. I think that the better idea would be to utilize vocational skills or trade skills as potentially a pathway to open doors to even more higher education, right? And when we say, okay, how can we do that? I go back to my original statement, which was if businesses take an active role in helping those in their trade or vocation achieve higher education and alleviate some barriers, then we can get there.
You know, there's one more point to be made, and that is that some of these institutions are not just about skill training, they're about upskilling and retraining, because the reality of it is that many of us are going to have multiple careers over the trajectory of our adult life, and giving and providing and offering opportunities for career switching is another important part of the equation, I think.
I thought one of the things we spoke about earlier was the career path for a teacher, actually, because Maryland is an import state. We need many more teachers than we produce. So how can universities start that career path earlier than freshman year in college?
Well, I can talk a lot about teacher training. I spent 10 years as the dean of a college of education in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Ed schools are, in general, about a third to a half of the size they were 20 years ago. We've seen a tremendous decrease in the number of individuals who are seeking careers in education. Towson had been the largest, and still is the largest has the largest college of education in Maryland. It was the largest of our 6 colleges. It's now the smallest of our 6 colleges. It's an important college, and we need to find incentives and ways to bring people to the field. We need to find incentives and ways to bring people from other fields into education, as I mentioned, the retraining and reskilling and redevelopment opportunities for new careers. And by the way, Maryland's not alone. I don't think there's a single state in the country that's not an importer of teachers. We in Maryland do not produce, I don't believe a single state at this moment produces a sufficient number of teachers. And one of the reasons for that, by the way, is not that our ed schools have declined in enrollment, and they have, but we see on average, get this, on average the national data tell us that a teacher for 5 years post-receipt of degree, 5 years post-receipt of degree will no longer be in the classroom. So retention is as important as recruitment and training.
Well, I think also to add on to that, all of it exactly on point, having a relationship between public school systems and four-year universities is key, particularly when we're talking about the field like education. And so one of the partnerships that our public schools have with Towson University is through Educators Rising and Teacher Apprenticeship of Maryland. And so when we're thinking about building pipelines into a profession that we see a lot of flight from, particularly in the early years, and also a profession that it's harder and harder every year to recruit people into the teaching field, these pipelines provide a lot of opportunity for students that otherwise wouldn't have thought about this as a pathway. And so this is one example where a four-year system like Towson can provide incredible services for students into the workforce through a four-year program.
Yeah, great points.
Do we have another question? A last question?
Yes, we have. This is the last one here. What industries in the Baltimore region have the highest demand for skilled tradespeople? And if I could just tack on one thing to that, what is the best way to find out about local internships as well?
So one of the best ways to find out about local internships, if you're at the middle school, we have career counselors that Blueprint has mandated and placed at middle schools around the state. Additionally, reaching out to a high school guidance counselor would be also a next, good stop to learn about the different pathways that exist. Within the Baltimore area on the trades side, we're always seeing demand with HVAC technicians, plumbers, carpenters, just tradespeople are always in high demand. Like there's a reason why when we call a plumber, we pay, $80 an hour. It's because there's a shortage and it's high skill, right? And so it's one of those jobs, I don't know how you make being a plumber sexy to a 16-year-old, but this really is sort of a high demand area that pays really well, right? And then within, across the state of Maryland, we also see outside of trades high growth in areas like cybersecurity and IT. They are almost always government-related jobs, but they pay really well, and we can't seem to churn out enough graduates in those high-tech fields to fill the demand that we have.
Well, let me add two to that. All good points. Liz mentioned, we were talking about teachers earlier. Educators, high need field, great need. Another are health professionals, in particular nurses.
Always.
Great shortage of nurses throughout the country.